Welcome back to Learn SKN, and today we're going to be looking at Module 1 from Unit 2 of Management of Business. So that's CAPE MOB. We're going to start looking at Module 1 from Unit 2. We'll also continue looking at Unit 1 in subsequent videos, but for now this is the first one for Unit 2. We're starting at Module 1, and the first module speaks of production and operations management. So we're going to look at that. The first one, nature of production. And so we need to understand first and foremost, as I would have said before, if you're looking at MOB, management of business, there's a reason why POB is a prerequisite for this subject in particular, because a lot of the stuff that you would have covered in POB, they retread some of that, but they go a little deeper. So they basically build on what you would have learned in POB. And so MOB, they expect you to understand certain things. For example, the nature of production. They expect that you would know the factors of production, being land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. So they're not going to go back over that. What you learn in high school, POB, should suffice to build on for MOB. So you already know the factors of production, and so we can move forward into the nature of production. As we're looking at the syllabus, and we're looking at the first part, A, of Objective 1, input, we're looking at the nature of production. So you have to look at input, throughput, output. This is the production process. And so we can look at that and see if we can cover up to some of the methods, and we'll see where we go from there. Right? We don't want too long of a video, so we're going to start looking at the process of production. And so we have it right here. So there are 3 steps in the process of production: the input, the throughput, and the output. And so if we remember, again, our POB, we know production simply means where you turn inputs into output. And so the part where they are turned into the output, that part, the middle part, is what we call the throughput. And so input would be the ingredients, the raw materials, whatever. And then the throughput would be whatever the process is that makes the raw material into the finished product. So for example, you might have your flour, and then you bake the flour, so that's the throughput, and the output would be bread, right? So that's the example, one example right there. You might have the banana and whatever, all the raw materials, you fry them, nice them up, bake them, whatever, that's the throughput. So the process that you use to transform the raw materials, that is what you call the throughput. So it could be either baking, it could be boiling, it could be synthesizing, it could be fermenting, whatever the process is you use to, that's the throughput, and that would turn the raw materials into the output. So that's the process of production in a nutshell. So some quick reading from the textbook. Input. This is the raw materials or components of production. It represents the items that a firm is going to convert to a finished product. It includes things such as bauxite, gold, agricultural produce. These raw materials would come from the factor of production, land. It is important to note that the finished product from one industry could be used as an input for another industry. For example, flour, which is an end result of processing wheat, could now be used in a bakery as input for bread. So I gave the bread example earlier, right? So that's one thing you have to realize, that the finished product for one industry, let's say the primary industry, that finished product can be used, or the secondary industry, that can be used in another industry. For example, taking raw materials such as the wheat and you grind it into flour, the flour now becomes the raw material for a baker, for a cook, or whomever. And then that would be the raw materials. Then the throughput would be the baking process, or the frying process, or the blanching process, or the synthesizing process, as I said before, or the fermentation process, whatever process they use, and that would then become the output. It could be crushing, it could be melting, as we'll see here if we look at throughput. So the throughput is a process that the raw materials or components go through before being converted into finished products. The range of processes will differ from industry to industry, but may include things such as crushing, melting, molding, welding, cooking, baking. So you understand what the throughput is. That's the actual process that turns the raw materials or the components into the output or the finished product, right? So the output would be things like the jewelry, the banana chips, the aluminum, the bread, whatever. So that's the process right there, the flow chart of production. So we understand that part as very well. Then, as I said before, the factors of production, we already know them from POB. And so that's land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And they represent inputs into production for the purpose of making a profit. So the factors of production represents the inputs into production. So your land, labor, capital, the entrepreneurship, all those are inputs into production. The labor is the mental or physical effort that goes into production. The land houses the premises, or even in certain areas, let's say a gold mine or something like that, the land is literally that aspect of production. But for the most part, it houses the factory, the premises, the business, and that is used in production. Capital, that would be the money, plus all the other resources, man-made resources, money, ingredients, raw materials, all those are capital. The vehicles, the equipment, all those are capital that are used in the production process. Entrepreneurship is the skill. Is the skill that is used to run the business, run the production unit. The skill that is used for that, the manager, whomever. The skill used in running that production unit, that is entrepreneurship. And so that goes into production. So yes, so those are the factors of production in a nutshell. However, before production can begin, there are certain decisions that must be made by the firm. These decisions are imperative because of the economic problem known as scarcity. This is a condition where resources are limited, but human wants are unlimited. So I'm reading from the textbook, and you can get the textbook if you look in the description and purchase the MOB pack. It should contain the textbook. Therefore, the firm will never be able to fulfill the wants of everyone. So we got that. So we know scarcity is a thing. Scarcity simply means that your wants are unlimited, but resources are limited. So your wants are infinite, but resources are finite. And so you have to make choices. You have to prioritize certain things over others. You can't just do anything, willy-nilly do anything, because that means that you're wasting resources. You have to make smart, strategic choices as to what you produce, how you produce it, where you produce it. So those are the questions that scarcity forces us to answer as a firm. We have to answer what to produce, how to produce, when to produce, and where to produce, right? But the syllabus is only asking us for basically what to produce, how to produce it, and where to produce it, right? But we're going to still cover when to produce it. So those are some fundamental questions a firm has to answer. What to produce, how to produce, when to produce, and where. Because like I said, resources are limited. So there is scarcity, and as such, we cannot afford to waste resources. Because if resources were unlimited, we have everything at our hands. What to produce would not be a problem. We produce everything. Because we have all the resources, so we can produce everything. How to produce it? Man, you spend all the money you want, the way you want, buy all the capital, labor, hire everybody, no problem right there. Where to produce? Again, you buy up all the land you want, and prime land if it was available. Because resources are unlimited. But because we live in reality, we know that resources are not unlimited. And so we have to make certain decisions based on scarcity of resources. And those decisions are, as a firm, you have to know what to produce, how to produce, when to produce, and where to produce. So what to produce? Simple. As a firm, you have to make sure you conduct your market research. We're going to look at market research later on. You have to conduct your market research, right? Some people would go based on a whim, right? Some people have that kind of skill that they say they'll produce something and they'll find a market for it, right? Remember, Apple is one of those companies that would produce something and you ain't even know you want it until they actually makes it. That's one aspect. But for the most part, for most businesses, they tend to try and do some market research and find out what the demand is for certain products. So whatever products are in high demand, then that would be the best chance of making a profit, and so they would choose that. So if they realize that a certain market segment, there's a gap in that market, need to be filled, unmet demand in the market, so you're just not producing enough or not at all, then they're gonna say, okay, I see room right there to slip in and start producing the same thing because the market has space. You have to do your research. You can't just up and produce just like that and hope that people are gonna buy. You have to do your research. So you have to go and try to produce whatever would give you the highest returns, the highest profit. Remember, the main aim of a business, of a firm, is to make a profit. I mean, in some cases in economics, they'll tell you to maximize profit. Not just to make a profit, but to maximize profit. So what to produce can be simply answered by doing the market research, see what's out there in the market, see what demand is not being met, and just go and meet that demand. Sometimes it's harder to figure out than, it's easier said than done. Some people just got a knack for it. They can see the market and say, okay, there's a gap here, let me fill that gap. Some people have the niche, looking for the niche market, and they try to fulfill that niche, right? So that's the main aim of what to produce speaks about what would make most business sense, what would make the most profit. It doesn't make sense to produce something that everybody else is producing and there will be a glut on the market and you get no sales. Doesn't make sense. You have to be smart and strategic about what you produce, and so you do your market research and you find out what out there has a high demand that's not being met, and you can fulfill that demand to maximize your profit, right? So again, you should understand what demand is versus supply from economics, from POB. Demand is the willingness of someone to purchase your goods at a particular price at a particular time, right? That's demand. The ability of someone to purchase your goods at a particular price at a particular time. So it's a willingness and ability. They have to have the ability to purchase it for it to be considered demand. Because some people are dreaming, people dream all the time. I wish I had this, I wish I had that. You're dreaming, but you're in a part of my market demand because you can't afford it. You're not that target market. But for those who are willing and able to purchase a particular product at a particular price at a particular time, that is who I'm targeting. That is my target market. That's the demand I'm trying to meet. That's the unmet demand I'm trying to fulfill to maximize my profit as a business. So that's what to produce, right? When to produce. So this one is a tricky one in a sense that, as the book says here, the syllabus doesn't really want you to focus too hard on when to produce, but no, it exists, right? Because you'd realize that a firm has to make a decision as to when to produce certain things. Certain things are seasonal. They only are in high demand certain time of year. And so you as a firm now have to go and decide, okay, this thing is in high demand at Christmas time. So let me ramp up production during this particular time so I can capture that market and maximize my profits. So that's when to produce. You have to know when. It doesn't make sense to produce something during a time when nobody is demanding that product. You'll waste your money that way, right? So it don't make sense. So you have to know when to produce a certain thing so that you can maximize your profit, right? So when to produce something, you have to know the seasonal, like I said, seasonal demand, so that you know, okay, Christmas time, demand is high, that's when I'm going to produce this particular product. So that's an idea of when to produce it. The lifespan of the product can also influence when you produce it. If a product spoils easily, it doesn't make sense to produce it way ahead of time, because that means when it's sitting on the shelf, it's going to spoil. If you're a restaurant person, it don't make sense to produce to cook your food fully 2 and 3 hours before lunchtime, because by the time patrons come, food don't start spoiling, things like that. So the lifespan of the product can influence when you produce it. If it doesn't spoil easily, man, you can produce it 6 months, put it in a warehouse, no problem. If it's perishable, then you have to produce it as close to consumption as possible. And of course, storage space and cost can influence when you produce something, because you don't want to have finished products laying around too long and taking up a lot of space and money and things like that, right? You don't want to have that happening. And so you have to factor in when to produce certain things. So that's two questions we have answered there. What to produce, when to produce. Right? Now, if you're looking at how to produce now, how to produce, as a company, right? As a company, you have to know what's the best way of producing your goods. How to produce them. How should I conduct production for this particular good? So that would answer the question of how to produce it. There are myriads of ways that you can produce a product, but it has to be based on, you know, the type of product, the job at hand, things like that, right? To make sure you know how to produce this particular thing, because everything doesn't have the same production process. I mean, yes, they have the same input, throughput, output, but they can come in different processes, different ways, right? For example, you wouldn't produce a pair of pants, let's say the same way you might produce maybe sodas, right? There are different methods of producing certain things. So how do I produce a particular good? Based on your good, based on your firm, you'll know how to produce it. So let's read it quickly here. Production methods. Having made a decision on what to produce, the producer must now decide on the method of production. The production method available to the firm are discussed below. So we have job production. We have job production. We have batch production. We have flow production. We have cellular production, right? Those are some production methods. And so we'll go through each of them one at a time. So job production, as the name suggests, job production, you take on a single job. For example, if you're, let's say, making something customizable, something you're customizing, then that would require a job production method, because you have to go and sit down and work on that particular product, because everything are to certain specifications. It's not a mass produced product. For example, you want to build a car, a certain car, a luxury car, a custom made car. That would be a job production for the particular company. They will focus on making that particular car with all the labor and the skill for that particular time. From beginning to end, they're working on that car. Building a house, that's a job production right there. You're focusing on that house, and so you're going to bring all the skills, all the skilled laborers, all the painters, everybody to work on that particular house, because that house is a job, a single product being produced. So when there's a single product being produced and it's customized to certain specification, that's when a job production method is best, right? So job production is used when a single product is produced to meet individual specifications. Such productions are usually a one-time production built to buyer's design and specification. For example, a custom built car, a wedding dress, shipbuilding, or bridge building. Job production usually involves single workers, for example, a dressmaker, or a group of workers, for example, construction workers, working on a particular product. The following are some notable characteristics of job production. So you get the gist of job production. It's a single job, it's customized or individualized, it's designed to certain specifications, and in some cases, just one person would work on it, like a dress, the tailor, the seamstress, or a group of workers coming together to work on the one thing, like construction workers working on a building. So some characteristics of job production. The focus is on the individual customer and not the entire market. So you're pinpointing that person want the house built, that person want the dress, that person want the car customized. So it's an individual customer. So you're not producing for the market on a whole. The product is usually highly priced. Of course, you know how anything customized would be highly priced compared to a mass-produced item. The labor force is highly versatile and skilled, for sure. Tailor, seamstress, the carpenter, the mason, those are skilled persons. Machinery and equipment are usually flexible so that they can be used for different jobs. Only one product is made at a time. Job production right there in a nutshell. Some advantages of job production. The product is tailored to the needs of the customer. As we said before, it's individualized, it's customized to the particular person's liking. It is easy to isolate any problems that may arise. So we are saying here that because it's one job, it could be one person doing it, you have the schematics, whatever the design, you can quickly pinpoint, okay, there's a problem right here, right? Because one product you're making, so you only one thing you have to focus on, and so you can see where you might have gone wrong. In a house, you might say, okay, the tile not going on properly, the plumbing might have an issue, whatever. So you can see where the problem is easier than if you're making a whole batch of stuff. The workforce is greatly involved with the product, which will improve product job satisfaction. The product is usually of high quality. That doesn't mean always, because sometimes you get a house and when you get the house, you ain't in the best of shape, The tiles them leaning one or they're cracking up, the floor ain't level, some people will give you a bum job. But it's supposed to be of a high quality, because you're working on one thing, following the design, you should be able to nail it. Disadvantages of job production: very high per unit cost when houses are expensive. A custom-made suit is expensive. A custom-made car is expensive. We know these things. Once it's customized, it's expensive. Requires very skilled and flexible labor force. High spending on machinery and equipment. Products are normally very expensive, right? So those are some disadvantages of job production. Batch production, on the other hand, we know what batch is. We know how this go, right? You produce certain things, items, in batches, right? For example, maybe you have a batch of 100. You produce 100, put it aside. Produce the next 100, put it aside. So that's a batch right there. Batch of drinks, batch of products, food, whatever. So batch production. With the increase in market size and demand, it would be impossible for firms to use job production method to satisfy the needs of all their customers. There would be then the need to produce a number of the same products at the same time. So if you want to order, let's say, custom jerseys or specially printed t-shirts or memorabilia and things like that, your pen, the pencil, water bottles, those things, that will be done in a batch, right? Because that's multiple things that are similar, but not for everybody, right? That's just for you. So instead of producing a job book for t-shirts and whatever, no, you print all of the same ones. That's a batch right there, right? So there would then be a need to produce a number of the same products at the same time. This is made possible through the use of the batch production. This method allows a group of products to undergo a production process at the same time, right? So with batch production, the work can be organized into a number of steps, with each batch of products going through each step at the same time before moving to the next step. For example, in the soft drink industry, drinks will be poured into the group of bottles, then corks will be fitted, and then the batch of drinks. So you understand that? So picture a bunch of sodas being produced. You know how that goes, right? You can have a certain amount in the batch. So you run the line, fill up a bottle, you move to the next step, cork the bottle, move to the next step, pour on the labeling, move to the next step, put them all in a package, wrap them up. That's the batch right there, right? So you could picture that. So that's an example of the batch production. Okay, good. Then this is some characteristics of batch production. The skill level of labor force is relatively high, but lower compared to job production, because you still need people to man all those things, right? People need to know how to mix the brew and things like that, and carry out using machinery and stuff like that. But it's still not as high as the job. Appropriate for repeat customer orders. Equipment cost is lower, as one piece of equipment is used on a number of products. Produce a standardized product. So think about it again. Coke, Pepsi, Sprite, all of them coming in batches. Usually has a high inventory of work in progress, of course, because after all, you have to store the steps them. So you have this step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So when this step done, you move that on to the next step. So of course, you're gonna have a high inventory of work in progress, because for the time, let's say you're doing 10,000 bottles, for that 10,000 bottle would be filled. Then to the next step, cork, next step, labeled, next step, process. So you always have a high, and right behind it might be a next batch, right? Getting geared up to go. So you always have a high level of work in progress in inventory. Machines are organized and grouped based on the functions that they perform. So if a machine is for filling, right there. If it's for labeling, right there. If it's for packaging, it's right there. So advantages of batch production: lower machinery requirement compared with job production. Quality control can be done as the products pass to each process. So you fill it, you check and see, okay, this fill to the max. Is this color right? Okay, it is. Next step. You caulk it. Is it caulked tightly? Whatever. Next step. Labeling. Is the label okay before you package? Next step. So at every step, you can actually inspect the batch to make sure that the quality is being maintained. Lower labor costs as workers are less skilled. Remember, it's basically almost automated. So the labor is not going to be as expensive because per unit, the labor, like, you might require one person to just watch the line as running the batch for first step, second step, third step. Right? So the labor cost is going to be lower. Takes less time to complete a product, so firms can respond quickly to orders. So what I'm saying is that compared to other, like job, it takes less time to fulfill a batch. So that means turnaround is fast. That batch done, next batch up. That batch done, next batch up. Because it's a relatively faster process than job. Lower per unit cost as a result of large scale production. Right? You're producing 1,000, 10,000 drinks. Of course, all the costs are going to be spread across each unit, and so overall costs would be less because of economies of scale. Disadvantages of batch production: cash may be tied up in work in progress, so you have cash tied up in inventory, such as the ones that are being filled, the ones that are being labeled, the ones in the warehouse, that kind of thing. So cash can be tied up in a lot of inventory, work in progress. Machinery and equipment downtime as the firm switches between batches of products. So they're saying that if you, let's say you're running a batch of t-shirts with a certain name or logo or whatever, certain customized jersey, when that finish, downtime, change out the filament, change out this, change out that, get it ready, get the color scheme ready for a next batch. So you have downtime between switching from one batch to the next. The level of motivation may be lower for the workplace because you're doing the same monotonous job over and over and over, so it can't be fun. It's not no specialization there, so you might get a little bored. Small batches of products may lead to an increase in unit costs. So you see this one right here? That's why some people only give you a small amount, like give you a unit cost for a certain amount. For example, they're not going to start their machinery for nothing less than, let's say, 100 shirts or nothing less than 50 shirts. Because one shirt ain't make no sense to start all the equipment for 1 or 2 or 5 shirts, because the startup cost alone is more than that 1, 2, 3, 4 shirt gonna come up to. So small batches are not easily done because it's gonna be more expensive. So that might be a problem. And so that is batch production. Then you have flow production. Where there is a very high demand, flow production is the most suitable method to use. It involves the organization of the work process in sequential steps so that each step passes through each stage before moving to the next. It uses a series of repetitive processes to produce standardized products. Unlike a batch production, the products are produced continuously and do not have to wait on batch of products. So they're saying here that flow is the same product straight through. Remember, in batch, it's as it was a batch, so in groups. Remember the example I gave. Let's say you're doing a batch of customizable jerseys. So what they're saying is that when that amount is done, let's say you have an order for 1,000 customized jerseys or t-shirts. When that 1,000 is finished, you have to go on to a next batch, a next set. But in flow, it's going to be straight. It's just the same thing straight. Right? So the same thing is straight. Different steps, but the same product straight throughout. Right? So that's a big difference between batch and flow. Flow is continuous, straight. So you're making the same soda and the same factory. Let's say you're making a factory with all cokes, straight through, right? You ain't gonna attempt to change out and things like that. Okay, the product passed through each stage via a conveyor belt or assembly line, like for example a car. That's the next example. This method is used to mass produce products and meet high demand. It makes use of division of labor and specialization. Flow production has a very high capital outlay, meaning it's very expensive to buy the equipment, but costs can be recovered over time due to mass production and sales. For example, flow production can be found in car manufacturing industry and other large manufacturing plants. So you see the cars going down the assembly line, down. So all of the, let's say all of the Camrys, down the line, all of the Corollas, down the line, all the RAV4s, down the line, right? So that's an example of flow production, the car manufacturing industry. Flow production takes different forms depending on the industry and the manufacturing process. These forms may include mass production, continuous flow production, or process production. And you can tell what mass production is. That involves the production of identical and standardized products. This type of production is done on a very large scale and requires the product of goods in relatively short time. So for example, if you're making household appliances, like a television, mass production, because everybody buying them, everybody buying these things, so you mass produce these things. You make a whole lot one time, right? And so that's flow production, but as for a mass produced product, large scale production, right? So the example I gave you, household appliances, right? So anything that is maybe shoes and those kind of things might have an example of mass production. One is a common, it's not a customized one, it's a common one, then you'll have mass production going on for those things, right? So that's an example right there, the household appliances, because all heat is going to be created the same, all TV the same for that particular line. You have continuous flow production. This is where the product being produced goes through a continuous series of processes. There's no stoppage until the product is complete. This is often used in conjunction with process production, right? So you go from one straight to the next, continuous flow production, never stopping until the product is complete. Process production, as the name suggests, this form of flow production involves the product being going through different processes until completion, right? It is used to convert raw materials into finished products, such as converting crude oil into petroleum. So consider a process being done, right? It's a process being done in this production method. And so in a process have different stages. And so you have to start and you go straight through the process. When the process is over, then you have the product. You know, for example, you're making, let's say, converting the crude oil into petroleum, or converting, let's say, olives into olive oil. That's a whole process. You have to crush, do whatever you have to do, cold press until the process is done. So when it's a process, you use process production. All right, you're making maybe a beer, you're making something that you have to be fermented, whatever, process production. So those are examples of flow production, but you know, based on the product, you'll know what to do, right? So those are some examples of those things. Common features of flow production: uses a greater amount of semi-skilled or unskilled workers. The product price is lower due to mass production. Firms experience economies of scale, meaning as they grow, their cost comes down, and so they can produce more on a larger scale. The process is highly automated. Large amounts of raw materials and components. A standardized product is produced. Setup cost is exorbitant. So let's say the initial cost of this kind of production is high, but over time it might basically pay for itself. So advantages of flow production: lower per unit cost as a result of economies of scale. So we're saying if you're producing on a mass level, because you have so many units, that is going to spread across all the units, and so your overall per unit cost would be lower than job or batch, because it's spread across all those units, and you have results of economies of scale, meaning the cost coming down as the output increase. Large amounts of goods can be produced quickly, can be used to meet the ever-growing demand of the market. There is a reduced need to store large amounts of finished goods due to the speed of production. So because you're producing a mass market item, you know they're going to fly off the shelves, and so you don't have to wait around to have them stored in the warehouse and stuff like that, right? So that's an advantage of flow production. Disadvantage of flow production now: very high setup cost, as I said before, because you have to get all the equipment in place, all for every step, every stage, so it's expensive initially. If something goes wrong, the entire assembly line can be halted, so that can cost you some real money right there. If something goes wrong somewhere, the whole thing comes to a halt, and that's problems right there. Quality is sometimes sacrificed for quantity, because you realize these things moving so fast that you can't really inspect every single one of them. Inspect every other 100 or something like that, and meanwhile bad ones slipping through, right? So that's a sacrifice right there. Work can be repetitive and boring, which leads to low motivation for workers. Again, most of it is automated, and so workers just there pressing buttons, basically pressing buttons, and that can be boring and not motivating to the workers. Usually inflexible, as it is difficult to alter the production process if consumer tastes change, because you would have invested so much money in the equipment and everything for specific jobs, specific production type. If something happens, you can't change as readily as you can to meet the market. Yeah, you're not as flexible as you can be. You have to go and rip out all the equipment, change up this, change up that, in order to meet the new taste in the customer. So you're going to have a lag between when you can actually change to the new taste from the old one, and that might cost you some money and time. And so that is flow production right there. The last one is cellular production. So basically production in cells. So you produce an item in different cells. So you might have a flow space, this section for this part of the product, that section for that part of the product, that section for that part of the product, different cells. So cellular production, also known as cellular manufacturing, it involves dividing a factory into cells that will carry out specific tasks on the product. For example, if you are making a shirt, you can have somebody work on the collar, somebody work on the sleeves, somebody work on the back or whatever, in different areas on the floor. So you pass it on from one cell to the next, right? So that's cellular production right there. So each cell is equipped with the machinery needed to complete that particular product, to complete that part of the product. Once the task is completed, the product will then move to the next cell. For example, in making a shirt, one cell might be responsible for sewing the sleeves, another for the colors or the buttons, and will pass through each cell before it is completed. Cell production could also be used to produce particular products or product family. In this case, each cell would be dependent on the other to produce products or part of the target production or the types of products, right? So cell production promotes teamwork, and each member is responsible for maintaining quality and design of the product. Benefits of cellular production: quality is improved as each cell has to ensure that the quality is maintained. So every cell will look at the product and say, okay, maybe they might have missed something in the previous cell. Let's ensure that this doesn't happen again. You go back, have them sort it out. So you can inspect at every cell, and that can improve overall quality. Teamwork normally leads to increased motivation, improvement in the skill level of employees. There's a reduction in the amount of floor space used as each cell occupies less space than if an assembly line was being used. The firm could see a reduction in work in progress. Disadvantages: the level of output may be less than if using a flow production method, because remember, you have to move from one cell to the next. That takes time. So you can reduce the level of output instead of the machinery just flying full speed. Capital and equipment costs could be very high. And so those are the disadvantages of cell production. So let's look at some factors that can influence the method that the firm decides to choose in terms of production. So factors that influence the method of production used, right? So remember, scarcity, resources are not infinite, and so you have to choose the method of production that best serves that particular firm. So let's go to the nature of the good. That's one factor, right? Nature of the good. Now, based on the type of good that you're producing, then you'll know what method to use. For example, if you're building a house, naturally you cannot use a flow production, right? You have to use a job. If you're doing customized jerseys, you might want to use a lot of them. You might want to use some form of batch production. So the nature of the good will tell you which production type is best, right? If it's a perishable good, you might want to use maybe if it's a car, for example, a mass-produced good, then of course you use some form of flow production. So the nature of the good will influence your production method. Expected sale or demand. If demand levels are high for a particular good and you want to hit the market, hit it hard, hit it fast, then you might want to use a flow production method because you want to get them out fast. Mass production, get them out so to get them sold, right? But if it's a good that is just a niche market, you may want to use maybe a job, you may want to use maybe a batch, right? Because it's a niche product. Not everybody want this jersey like that color, whatever. So you might want to use that particular method, right? So expected sale or demand, the expected level of sales or demand will influence the method of production. If the organization is expecting high sales or demand, it may employ a flow production method, where goods can be produced quickly and in large quantities. Same way, the size of the market. If the market is large and you have to fulfill a large market, then of course you want to go with a quick way, so that's flow right there. If the market is small, a little niche market, you may want to go down to customization, so you might go to job, or if it's a lot of the same, you may want to go to batch, so depending on the market size for that particular product, right? If it's based on the stage of the product life cycle. So we can look at product life cycle later on, right? So just know that some products, all products go through a life cycle. Some end faster than some. So you might start off hot, high in demand, and as the product gets older, the demand for the product drops. And so that would tell you what production method to use. If the product is new brand, want to hit the market, large market, they make it with flow, mass production, some for flow mass production. But if the product is basically reaching slowing down, you may want to change that method type and go to a batch or something like that. You don't want to dedicate the whole factory flow anymore to a product that is basically outdated or on its way out, right? So you determine the production method based on whether the product is in high demand or demand for it is slowing down. Level of technology, right? Based on the methods we looked at, some require a lot of money and equipment, some doesn't require as much, and I saw the ones that require a lot of equipment, you may want to go with flow, because if it's a mass produced something, you may want a special automation, special equipment, and so that might determine that angle, right? Look at cars. You can have a car either built in as a job if it's a customized car, or built in batch or flow based assembly line based on if it's a mass produced car, right? So even a car, you can see the different types being employed based on the nature of the job, and so you will determine different levels of technology. Initial capital outlay, again, if it costs a lot to start out to begin with, you might go to a cheaper method of production. When you get the money, you might ramp up to a larger method of production, right? So you might start a little slow, a little batch, a little job or something, and then as the product gets more popular, as you grow, economies of scale, you might ramp up to some form of flow, whether it's continuous or mass or whatever, right? So that would determine that part. And so that's basically it for the factors that influence the method of production used. So we're going to stay here for now. That we have said a mouthful. We looked at, based on the syllabus, we looked at the production process. So we looked at what is input, factors of production, land, labor, capital, entrepreneur. We looked at throughput, the process, and we looked at the output, which is the finished goods. And then we went ahead and looked at production methods. We looked at the job production, batch production, flow production, and cell production. And so we're going to stay there for now. And the next video, we're going to look at the location of production. And we'll look at what influences the location of production, right? So we're going to stay there for now. You know what to do. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when Learn SKN drops another video for CAPE MOB Unit 2 Module 1. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.